Hello and welcome to another pen video from me, Penultimate Dave. So I have here another 10 pens currently inked this week. I think let's go through these briefly one by one. We'll go through them in a little bit more detail and then we'll do a writing sample. So from left to right we have an Edison pen company. This is the Collier in antique marble. We have a Parker Duofold and this is the Centennial. And this is in the pearl and black. We have a Parker Duofold Prestige in the blue chevron. We have a Parker Duofold Prestige in the black chevron. We have an Omas Milord in Arco brown. An Omas Paragon in Arco brown. We have a Danitrio, and this is the Moonlit grass. We have a Leonardo Officina Italiana Momento Zero Grande in the sand. We have a Armando Simoni Bologna Extra, and this is in the black and gold Lucens. And we have a Pelikan M800 Grande Plus. So, let's take a look at these pens in a little bit more detail. So this is the Edison Pen Company Collier. And I went through a number of years ago, I think around 2016, 2017, I realised I liked big pens and I couldn't lie. And I decided that I would get what was the Edison Collier in the persimmon swirl. And I liked it, and I think within 6 months to a year, probably a year, I decided I wanted a couple more. And I bought this one, and I bought the blue, I can't remember what it's called now, but it was a blue version of it. But this one is the one that I really wanted, and I love this. And I was going through a really a phase of liking stub nibs. So I got a stub nib on this, and I really didn't like it. It was a stub nib without tipping. I love stub nibs with tipping. I don't like them without tipping. So I got this with tipping. I did also at one point buy a broad nib as well. And more recently this year, I've actually put a broad nib in this pen and I am absolutely loving it. So I decided I had to ink this one back up. I've had it inked up for a little while now, on and off. This has the broad Yovo steel nib there. It's got the Edison logo on. It's a cartridge converter pen. I like the pen because it's a longer pen. It's a little bit more girthier, although the section isn't as girthy as the body. You can't post these caps, unfortunately. And I think that's what really stopped me from using this. But if you know me, I don't post my caps. So I have no idea why I stopped using these, other than maybe it had a stub nib on it and I just fell out of love with the stub nibs without tipping. So I have been inking that one back up, and I am honestly thinking I may have to get a couple more broad nibs, because the blue one that I have, strangely enough, I also bought a stub nib on it, and I think my persimmon swirl has a medium nib. And I didn't really care for the Yovo medium nibs that much. So I've got some broad Yovo nibs. I could just put it in there. But I might actually get an Edison replacement nib and put that on the other one. And maybe start writing with that a little bit more. The next pen I have inked up this week is this one. And this is a pen that I had really been after for a long time. And I always told myself, if I saw this and I saw it for a good price, I would buy it. And then about 3 years went by, and I never saw one for a good price. I saw several. And this is the Parker Duofold Centennial in the pearl and black. And I love it. I really do. So I have this one inked up again. This has an 18 karat gold nib there. And this, strange enough, is a fine nib. And when I actually saw this, I thought, oh, it's a fine nib. I don't normally do fine nibs, especially rigid nibs. And I know the Parker Duofold nibs are quite rigid, even though they're 18 karat gold nibs. And I really don't know that I want a fine nib. But I could always swap the nib out. And I've got a medium nib in, strange enough, in this pen. So I got this with a fine nib, and I'm absolutely loving it. So I decided I would ink that one back up. I'm actually using quite a viscous ink, and maybe that's why I'm liking it a lot more than maybe just a regular ink. I also have this one inked up, and this is what started me down the Parker Duofold route. This is a Parker Duofold. I want to call this the Centennial. I always want to call it a Centennial because it's a Centennial size pen. However, it's not a Centennial. It's a Prestige, and it's a blue chevron. And when I saw this pen, I saw this on, I think it was WH Smith. It was around one of those days, weeks, months where you're bored, you want a new pen, you can't find a pen, so you just start searching sites. And I searched one of our stationers here in the UK called WH Smith, and they had this pen, and they had it for a cracking price. So I bought it, and I was so glad I did. This has, again, another 18 karat gold nib. This is, I went for a medium. I could have got it in a fine, could have got it in a broad, could have got it in a medium. These are metal pens. I believe they may be made of brass. I'm not sure, but they're gold plated. It's a really nice pen to write with. Again, Parker Duofold nibs are stiff, rigid nibs. And you'll see also the other thing that I do find with these is that you don't have any fins on that feed. And it's a very low profile feed. So what I do find sometimes is you start writing with it and a little bit of ink blurps out of effectively the breather hole here and drops onto the page. So I know some people say you don't need fins, they're just a cosmetic. Yes, they are, but they're not as well. They can help retain ink and allow you to have better ink flow on pens, but also it will stop ink burping onto the page. So that's one of the downsides I would say with some of these Parkers is that if you just ink the pen up and or if you've primed the converter, or even you've had the pen shaken around a little bit in a bag or something in a pen case, and you go to uncap it, you start writing with it, maybe within a minute or two you'll find it will burp a little bit of ink. The next pen, again, is another Parker Duofold. Again, it's a Prestige, but this is a black chevron. And I think fast forward about, I think it was about another 4 years, I always wanted the black or the burgundy version of the blue chevron. And I saw this one, and it was advertised, and again, for a pretty good price. A price that I really couldn't believe. And I saw this and I decided, you know what, I've got to buy it. Again, though, this unfortunately came with, yep, you got it, a fine nib. So it's an 18 karat gold, again, rigid nib, but it's ruthenium plated with a fine nib. But I am liking it. So it is maybe not as good as maybe this fine nib, but I am liking it. It's not. Normally, I will try a fine nib and I will say, oh, that's really not to my liking and not right with it again. But for me, like I love a fine nib if it's a bouncy, springy nib, like if it's maybe a Visconti 18 karat gold or a 23 karat palladium nib that has a little bit of bounce to it, then I will love a fine nib. But if it's a rigid nib, then, and I'm the same with a Yovo medium steel nib, that I kind of find it's too rigid and it's too narrow and there's no give in the nib, whereas a broad Yovo steel nib I do like a lot. So again, that's just my preference. Your preference may be the same, it may vary. Each of our preferences are different, and that's why there are so many different pens around and different nib manufacturers and nib widths and nib grinds. So each person is different, and maybe I will get to love some of these more rigid, finer nibs, or even, dare I say it, extra fine nib, because I really don't do extra fine nibs, at least not at the moment anyway. The next pen here is an Omas Milord, and I remember I got this from Ray at Vintage and Modern Pens. I had actually asked him at one point, I sat down with him a number of times, spoke to him at pen shows as well, and I said to him, I said, have you got any Arco? And this was, I think this was around 2017, maybe 2018. And he said, yeah, I've got quite a few Arcos. I'll send them all to you. I'm like, that's not a good idea. And he sent me this one, the Omas Milord. He sent me this one, an Omas Paragon. Yeah, and you can guess what happened. And he sent me 2 Omas Paragons in the Arco Verde. And I actually sent those 2 back to him and said, the nibs, again, they were like fine or extra fine nibs. I didn't like them. But this one I did love a lot. So I ended up purchasing this one. And you can see this beautiful Omas Arco material there. I kind of did pay a little bit over the asking price for it. I did manage to knock Ray down a little bit. So I didn't pay what would have been his show price. But this has a lovely 18 karat gold. And this is I believe it's a medium. Yeah, it's got an M there for medium. You just see on the side of that nib. But this is a beautiful pen. I love Arco. And I love writing with this, although I haven't written with it a lot lately. And mainly because I more recently, probably a year after, bought a Omas Paragon Extra in the Arte Italiana Paragon Grande. And that to me was a much nicer, slightly larger writing pen, and I've been writing on that ever since. So I tend not to write with this one as much. And likewise, this Paragon, this is not the Grande, the Arte Italiana. This is the smaller Paragon. I got this again from Ray, and what can you say? I was a sucker for the Arco at that moment in time. I still am, but I liked this Arco, and I liked how this Paragon wrote. And more to the point, the reason why I bought this was not because it was Arco, not because it was a small Paragon, but because it has a broad nib. And I absolutely love writing with this, although I do find that section a little bit on the narrow side. You can post the cap if you want to. It doesn't post deeply, but you can post that cap. But this is a beautiful pen. And it honestly, lengthwise, it's fine for me. But you can get those piston knobs to line up a little bit better. But I do like this. I love how it writes. Because it's a board, it does go through ink very quickly. It's got 3 threads, so you do have to get the right thread to match it up there. But that is, again, another pen that I do like writing with, but I just haven't written with it a lot lately. The next pen is a new pen this year to my collection. It wasn't a pen that was on my radar. I had been looking at some Danitrios. I had been looking at some Urushi pens. But this one I didn't know existed. And that's when our collecting becomes a little bit dangerous. So William Shakur, one of my friends, he had a number of pens for sale. And I saw this on his list for sale. And I asked him what the price was, and he told me, and I said, I've got to have it. This is a Danitrio, and this is a spectacular Urushi Makie pen, and I love the pattern on this a lot. And this is the Moonlit Grass, and you'll see here that it has a load of Japanese writing there, and then Japanese writing there. And you have the grass there as well. So you've got the grass in the moonlight. And it's a beautiful Aka Tamanori pen. And I really do like this. And again, this was another pen that, strangely enough, is a fine nib. And I don't normally go for fine nibs. But when William sent it to me and I dip tested the nib and I wrote with it, I found it wrote more like a Western medium. It was very wet, had a slight bounce to the nib, and I liked it. So I decided, yeah, I'm going to have to get this. So this this is a cartridge converter pen. But that Danitrio nib, it's not a number 8 size nib like I've got on my other Danitrio. It's a number 6 size, but that Danitrio logo there is quite interesting. These two are piston filling pens. This is a cartridge converter pen. So I'm loving it though. It's a beautiful pen. Can I post the cap? Yeah, I can do, but it's not really going to stay on. And I normally with Urushi, you don't feel these patterns. On this pen, you do. It's very raised, so I would worry about marring that finish and damaging and marking some of that. I do also have a artist signature there in gold and in red, and you've got some sort of gold, sort of, I want to say stardust. It's not. It's like stars or something. But I really love this pen. So I have that one inked up this week as well. Another trusty pen that I do love is this Leonardo Officina Italiana Momento Zero Sand, and this it's a Grande version, and I love this pen to bits. I had seen it. Leonardo had released it within about a month, and I went to the London Pen Show, and the first table I went to was John Foy's table, John at St John's Pens, and he had one. And I said to him, that's a gorgeous pen. He said, oh, yes, it is. And I said, what nibs it got in it? And I opened the cap. He said, I think it's a medium. And yeah, it's a medium, and I absolutely love it. And so it's a steel nib. It's not, most of the Grandes nowadays typically are gold nibs, but it's a medium steel nib, ebonite feed, and I love how this writes. It writes a little bit more between a medium and a broad, Western term wise. It's a cartridge converter, but it's more of a sort of integral piston. It's a much wider converter. You cannot remove it, so you cannot put cartridges in here. So it's what they call a captured converter, and the reason why it's captured is if I unscrew what would be a piston knob, you can activate that converter there without unscrewing the body, but typically I never do. But it's a lovely long pen for me, and I can post a cap if I want to. It's a perfect writer, and I had a bottle of ink come with it, Leonardo purple, and I always ink this up with purple. There are a few exceptions of pens in my collection that I do not match the ink color to the pen color, and this is one of them, because I decided, you know what, Leonardo purple, I've not tried a Leonardo ink, let me just try that ink in this pen. Oh my god, it was beautiful writer. So at that point I decided that's it. This pen is going to be inked up with that ink all the time, until that bottle of ink runs out. And I have to say, I am down to, I'm just looking now, about half a bottle of that ink. So I don't know if I will be able to get another bottle of that ink. I probably would switch to another purple. I like Diamine Imperial Purple. I like Diamine Majestic Purple the best. I like KWZ Gummy Berry. And I think there's another purple as well. I'm just looking at other inks I've got on my ink wall. I think there's another purple ink that I'm forgetting. There's probably several anyway. So I would probably just switch to another purple ink instead. Rather than me buying a Leonardo bottle. I don't think we can buy Leonardo ink bottles in the UK. I might be wrong. I've not really looked. But maybe we can, maybe we can't. I don't know. I know there are some retailers that sell Leonardo pens, but they're not like large retailers. So I don't know. I'd probably swap it out with Diamine Majestic Purple probably in the end. The next pen I have inked up this week is this one, and it's a large pen. It's the Armando Simoni Club Bologna Extra, and this is the black and gold Lucens, or it's really called the black Lucens. I've seen elsewhere it being called black and gold Lucens because there's a lot of gold in it, or black and honey as well. So I call it the black and gold Lucens, although I think its actual technical term, or its real name, is the black Lucens. But this is a beautiful, beautiful material. So this is a semi-translucent material. You've got the black, which is opaque. You've got the gold. If I show you here, there's some like honey gold colors. And then you have the semi-transparent color. And when I say gold, you can see here, like on that cap finial, it looks like a pot of honey. It really does look like a pot of honey. So this is a really nice pen. This is it has a number 8 size nib, ASC Magic Flex nib. These are it has an ebonite feed. They are medium nibs. They typically write more like a Western board, and they are super wet fire hose nibs. It's a pneumatic filling pen, so you do have to unscrew the knob here. It does have a hole here, and what you're supposed to do is you pull this out, and then you put your finger over this. I'm not going to put my finger on it, because when you push that back with your finger on it, it creates a suction. You let your finger off, and then because what you've done is you've compressed the sac. If you've got the nib and feed in ink, then once you let your finger off, it will suck up the ink into what is a latex sac inside. Now, a lot of vintage pens use latex sacs, and you do have to replace them from time to time. I've read that an average latex sac will normally last for 10 or 15 years. I have had a few that have perished on me, and I have had to have them replaced within a year, probably 18 months, 2 years. So it can depend on the sac quality. It can also depend on the ink that you use. But that is something you have to bear in mind, not only with vintage pens, but also some modern pens that have pneumatic fillers that have sacs in. Some people can change the sacs themselves. A lot of people can't, and they do need to take their pen to a repairer. But it's just one of those things. So I have that one inked up this week as well. And then the last pen I have inked up is this one, and this is a Pelikan M800, and this is the Grande Place, and it's a beautiful material. It's another pen I picked up from Ray at Vintage and Modern Pens, and I had seen this before a London pen show. I saw he had it, and the price was way too much. I saw Regina Martini had it, and her price was a lot better in Germany. And then I went to the London pen show. Ray was there, and his price had gone up. Regina Martini was there from Germany, and her price had gone up. And you think that pen shows should be cheaper than buying a pen online, but they're not always, because you have a captive audience there. Plus, obviously, the pen show vendors are having to pay, in a lot of cases, £150 for a table, plus maybe a hotel room for a couple of nights, maybe flights. So they do sometimes put their prices up, and I can understand the reason behind that. But then after the show, I looked at Ray's website, I think within a couple of weeks, and he had reduced it, so I bought it. And this is a Pelikan M800, so it's a broad nib on that one, and it writes quite nicely. So I have, you can post the cap on these as well, the Pelikans, the M800s, they do post. Again, I don't do it, but you can do it. And you will perhaps notice that this is a transparent or semi-transparent cap there. So if I put the nib in, you can probably see the nib going through there. So I have that pen inked up this week as well. So I think with that, let's go and do a writing sample. So the first pen inked up this week is the Edison Pen Company Collier. So we'll do an ink swatch. And this is one of those inks I haven't really written with much, and it shows because I pretty much have a full bottle, and this is a Noodler's ink. And if you've ever had a look at a Noodler's ink bottle, you will see that the bottle is full to the brim. So it's still a pretty full bottle for me. So this is the Edison Pen Company. It's the Collier, and it's in antique marble, and it's a broad and it's a still Yovo nib. And then the ink in here is Noodler's Habanero. And a pen friend, Tony, from Kansas City, wrote to me with this ink, and I loved it. I thought it was Noodler's Apache Sunset to start with, because it had a lot of shading. Then I realised once I continued reading, it was Noodler's Habanero, and I am loving this ink, so I decided to ink that one back up again this week. The next pen is the Parker Duofold Centennial in the pearl and black. So we'll do an ink swatch. Now, if you recall earlier, I said that this has a fine nib on it. And yet this actually doesn't write like a fine nib. Shock horror. So this is a Parker Duofold Centennial, and it's the pearl and black, and it is a fine nib. No, it's not, but okay, it does say fine nib on it, so I will go with fine nib. It's an 18 cat gold nib, and the ink in here is a Diamine Imperial Purple, which is a purple ink I have avoided for a long period of time because I love Majestic Purple, and I've been set on that ink, and I think I bought 4 bottles of that ink over 5 years because I've gone through that ink a lot. I still have 2 bottles, so yeah, I think I had 5, and I've gone through 3 bottles of that. But this one is Imperial Purple. Now, this one, Majestic Purple, does have a lot of sheen, and this one has a lot of sheen as well. It's got a lot of gold sheen to it. But beware, this ink smells foul. It really, really smells foul. It's not just my bottle. Other people have commented as well. I think it's the probably some of the contents of the ink or the dye that they're using, Diamine are using, but also maybe the antifungal properties. So it doesn't smell nice. It does smell a bit rotten, but it's not. The next pen inks up this week is the Parker Duofold Prestige Blue Chevron. So we'll do an ink swatch. Now, this is a medium nib, and again, it's a bit of a rigid nib, as these Parker nibs typically tend to be. Certainly the modern ones. I've got a couple of vintage ones, and they are fairly rigid as well. So this is a Parker Duofold, and it's the Prestige, and it's the blue Chevron. And this is a medium nib, and I would honestly say it writes a little bit more between a medium and a broad nib. So it's an 18 cat gold nib. Does sing a little bit as well. The ink in here is Pelikan, Edelstein, and this is Sapphire, which is a blue ink that I am liking a lot. Let me show you the bottle on this one, because it is more of a sapphire, more of a bluey, like a lavendery blue colour in the bottle there. You might be able to get to see that, but it really, let me show you the cap there. It's not a regular blue. So that is another pen I have inked up this week. The next pen I have inked up this week is, again, another Parker Duofold Prestige, but this is a black Chevron. So we'll do an ink swatch, and this does have a little bit of a line variation. I would say it certainly has more line variation than that medium nib. And I just want to double check this because I'm pretty sure it is a fine nib. Yeah, it's a fine nib. So this is a Parker Duofold Prestige, and it's the black Chevron. So again, this is a fine nib like this one here, and again it's an 18 cat gold nib. And so out of these, I would say this one writes a little bit more of a broad, this is a little bit more of a medium, and this is a little bit more of a fine. So the ink in here is Franklin Christoph, and it's Sweet Maroon. And I know this is a black pen, and typically with a black pen, I will ink it up with anything. And the Franklin Christoph Sweet Maroon, I used to ink up in my Sailor 1911 Large, which is a black pen. So I've, in the past, inked this pen up with Sweet Maroon, and I have loved it. So I have this pen, is the next pen inked up this week, and this is the Omas Milord in the Arco Brown. So we'll do an ink swatch here. Now, this is a medium nib. I do like how this writes. It does write quite wet. It doesn't have a lot of bounce to it, but this is the Omas, and it's the Milord, and it's in the Arco Brown, and it's a medium, and it's an 18 cat gold nib. And then the ink in here is Ackerman, and it's SBRE Brown. But that is a beautiful writing nib, and I do like it a lot. It does have a little bit of feedback to that nib, I do find. The next pen is the Omas Paragon in Arco Brown. So let's do an ink swatch here. Now, if you recall, I did say that this is a broad nib, and I'm really loving it. Now, I want to show you something here, because this you're going to see a huge difference on. So this is the Omas Paragon, and it's in the Arco Brown. Oh, let me do that piston again. Arco Brown. There you go. This is a broad, it's an 18 cat gold nib. Now, the interestingness of this is inked up with exactly the same ink as the Omas Milord. Yet, you'll notice there that this is a lot lighter than this. So, it really depends on the type of nib and how wet it writes, or how dry it writes, and how broad the nib is, depends on how the ink looks on the page. So just bear that in mind when you get an ink and you think, that looks nothing like the swatch I've seen online, because that's where sometimes things can differ with the colour of inks. The next pen inked up this week is the Danitrio Moonlit Grass. So we'll do an ink swatch here. And I'm going to need to re-ink this pen. So let's try again, shall we? There you go. That's a little bit better. So I've just re-inked that pen up. Now this is a fine nib. So you will notice that it is a much finer line. It is quite a wet writing nib. So this is the Danitrio, and this is the Moonlit Grass, and it's a fine nib. It does have a lot of feedback to the nib. It's an 18 cat gold nib. I say 18 cat gold, I'm just going to look at that. I believe so, Yeah, 750. And the ink in here is Ackerman, and it's Dutch Masters, and it's Rembrandt's Carmozogen. The next pen I have inked up this week is a Leonardo Officina Italiana Momento Zero Grande in the sand. So we'll do an ink swatch after that very long name. And you can see why I like this ink. And I want to actually think that this might be similar to Diamine Imperial Purple. So I'm going to abbreviate this because I'm not going to fit it on otherwise. It's Leonardo Momento Zero Grande in the sand. Now this is a medium and it's a steel nib. This is one of the original Bock nibs that they used to use. They have now switched, I believe, mostly to Jowo nibs. And then the ink in here is Leonardo Purple. And I want to say that maybe it's somewhere between Diamine Imperial Purple and Diamine Majestic Purple. Maybe a little bit more towards Diamine Majestic Purple, but it's a beautiful purple ink. The next pen inked up this week is the Armando Simoni Club Bologna Extra, and this is the black and gold Lucens. So we'll do an ink swatch. And you'll see here that this is a very wet nib. The ASC Bologna Extra nibs are always with the Magic Flex nibs. So I get that on page on screen there. So this is an ASC Bologna Extra. And it's the black and gold Lucens. And it is supposed to be a medium nib. It's an 18 karat gold Magic Flex nib, but it writes more like a Western board. And the ink in here is KWZ Honey, which, like Ackerman SBRE Brown, is another ink that, depending on the nib width and how wet the nib writes, it can look either very dark or very light. I just want to show you, let me show you the cap of the bottle here. That's the kind of colour that you would normally expect from KWZ Honey. And then the last pen inked up this week is a Pelikan M800, and this is the Grand Place. So I will do an ink swatch here. Now, I do love this nib. It's a broad nib, and it writes spectacularly well. So this is the Pelikan M800, and it's the Grande Place. It's a broad and it's an 18 karat gold nib. And then the ink in here is Diamine Ochre, which again is another, strange enough, it's another brown ink that, depending on the nib, can write very dark brown or very light brown. In this pen, it typically, I do find that it's around about a lighter mid-brown. I do find the ink swatches, though, typically are a little bit more on the darker side, though. So I think let's go and take a look at these pens inked up one more time. We have an Edison Pen Company Collier in antique marble in a broad steel nib inked up with Noodler's Habanero. We have a Parker Duofold Centennial in a pearl and black in a fine 18 karat gold nib inked up with Diamine Imperial Purple. We have a Parker Duofold Prestige Blue Chevron in a medium 18 karat gold nib inked up with Pelikan Edelstein Sapphire. We have a Parker Duofold Prestige in the black chevron in a fine 18 karat gold nib inked up with Franklin Christoph Sweet Maroon. We have an Omas Milord in the Arco Brown, in a medium 18 karat gold nib inked up with Akamine SBRE Brown. We have an Omas Paragon Arco Brown in a broad 18 karat gold nib inked up with Akamine SBRE Brown. And again, you can see the difference here between these two colours. We have a Danitrio, and this is in the Moonlit Grass in a fine 18 karat gold nib inked up with Akamine Dutch Masters Rembrandt's Comozogen. We have a Leonardo Momento 0 Grande in the Sand in a medium steel nib inked up with Leonardo Purple. We have an Armando Simoni Club Bologna Extra Black and Gold Lucens in a medium 18 karat gold nib inked up with KWZ Honey, and this is still wet. Very, very wet. And then we have, last but not least, the Pelikan M800 Grande Class in a broad 18 karat gold nib inked up with Diamine Ochre. So there you have it. That's my currently inked pens for this week. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next pen video. Bye bye.